Okay, so welcome to the Technology and Equity panel. My name is Bismat Minhas. I serve as the Data Analytics Manager for City of New York. My pronouns are the she series. I have the privilege of introducing our panelists today. We are joined by Alicia Farina, who is a communications and technology strategist at NYU Langone Health. Greg Gunn, who is the founder of Lingo Ventures. Tim Hikes, a user experience consultant at Worldwide Technologies, and Anand Saraswath, an associate at Wolf Greenfield. Apologies if I messed up someone's name. Names are hard. Thank you so much for being here with us today. The insights you will share will be extremely valuable for all of us. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to the immensely talented Quinnell, who will be leading the space. I'm going to also mute myself, but I am present should you have any questions or run into any technical issues.
All right, thank you, Bismat. Hi, everyone. My name is Quinnell Redden, and I proudly serve as the team leader at PS 112 in Astoria, Queens, aka the Water Zone, so splash, splash. And I will be your panel moderator for this session, like Bismat said. So just kind of going off of that, since you heard a little bit about Bismat and a little bit about myself, I wanted to turn it to the panelists to further introduce themselves. And then I want to tag on this question of, out of all the industries out there, why the tech industry? What really brought you there? And so, Tim, if you would like to get us started.
Hi, everyone. I hope I'm not too loud. I might be too loud because I see the things like through the roof. Okay, awesome, great. Hi, everybody. I am Tim Hikes, natively from St. Louis, Missouri, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Currently, as they said, I work at Worldwide Technology. I am a user experience consultant. And what that means is I work with the users to help developers build frictionless software using human-computer interaction and ergonomic science, working with users to build these frictionless applications. A good example is you being able to use your iPhone easily and all the apps on it. I'm the one that they call in to help to make that process of you being able to intuitively know where everything is, everything just fits perfectly. That's me. A little bit more about my background. I went to the University of St. Louis, Missouri. I have a classical trained art background. My degree is in graphic design, and that includes a lot of drawing as well as a lot of instituting art on digital applications such as Adobe, their software suite. From there, I've been working in the tech industry since I graduated in 2015, and I've worked on any type of project you can think of. Worked with small organizations, large organizations, small app organizations, large airplane manufacturers. If you can name that particular field and help them build applications for their either employees or for the people that use their applications directly. That's a little bit about me.
And then definitely whoever wants to jump in next, go for it.
Sure, I'll go ahead and go. Yeah, my name is Greg Gunn, based in Brooklyn, New York, and as probably the oldest member of this panel, I got into tech back in the 80s. My elementary school bought an Apple II computer, and nobody knew how to use it, and so I just go in the school library every afternoon, and that's where I learned to program. And then in high school, I kept on programming, but in high school, I started getting interested in tutoring because I was helping other kids study for their SATs and study math. And sort of those two interests in sort of teaching and learning and in software just continued through my career. And so I worked as a middle school math teacher for a while and worked as a software developer for a while. Eventually decided to unify the interests and started a software company in 2000 called Wireless Generation, where we used these devices called Palm Pilots, which were very early portable devices, and we used them to help teachers diagnose kids' learning difficulties and figure out ways to instruct them in a more personalized way. I sold that business, and since then I invest in technology businesses, mostly in the education and training space. And in the last few years, I've focused a lot more of my both investment and advisory effort on entrepreneurs of color to help entrepreneurs of color have an advantage in the market.
Hi everyone, I'm Anand Saraswat. I'm an associate at the law firm of Wolf Greenfield in Boston. My focus is on IP law, in particular patent law. So primarily what I do is, if there are disputes between companies about, whether someone is using a patent or, whether someone thinks that somebody else's patent is invalid, I kind of work on those disputes in court and in the patent office. I also do a little bit of what they call patent prosecution, which is basically helping inventors get patents on new ideas they have. And kind of on the side, I've always been interested in immigrants' rights in particular, so I do a decent amount of pro bono work in the immigration law space. I got into tech as a kid, quite honestly, I think because my parents were sort of in science and tech. My parents came from India in the 70s. My dad was in computer systems. My mom was a biologist. So that was kind of the direction that they steered me in. And so I went to MIT for my undergraduate degree, worked as a software engineer for a few years, and then went to law school and have been doing IP law ever since.
Hi, my name is Alicia Farina. I work at NYU Langone Health as a technology strategist. I work primarily in two spaces. The future of work, which has obviously been accelerated because we're all working remotely and that space has really changed, and identity and access management. My pathway to technology is a lot more serendipitous. I have a bachelor's degree in art history. I moved to New York to become an artist. That doesn't always work. So I was looking, for work, and years and years ago, I started at CityMD doing kind of whatever they needed. And then I came to NYU Langone Health. The technology team there was looking for a different perspective, someone with a different background, to parachute into projects and initiatives that needed some support and some strategic thinking from a different angle. And I've been doing that for about 5.5 years there.
Wow. Okay. Thank you to our panelists. We definitely have a very diverse group here. And so no doubt this conversation is going to be interesting. But now that we've heard a little bit about you all, definitely want to dive into our tech and equity conversation. And so now more than ever, it really seems that technology is such an integral part of our day-to-day existence. And when we think about technology, it also begs a question about equity. So kind of jumping into our first question here, in your line of work, what inequities have you seen arise as a direct effect of the rapid growth of technology? And in no particular order, we can start with Anat, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, definitely want to hear from you. So take it away, Anat.
Sure. So in my line of work as a patent lawyer, I guess I can't point to one sort of new inequity that I've seen arise. The biggest inequity that I see, which is, I think, very troublesome, is that there's a huge problem in the tech industry with underrepresentation of African Americans and Latinos and women in the ranks of inventors. I mean, I think that the statistics are pretty dismal. And the tech industry and the patent office, they have been making efforts over the years to encourage more underrepresented groups to get patents. But there's still a very, very long way to go. And the reason I think that's such a problem is that, when you don't have enough diversity in the ranks of people who are developing and deploying new technology, what can happen is you can sort of stumble into problems, 10, 20 years down the line that people weren't sort of adequately thinking about kind of when these technologies were in their development, because you didn't have enough different perspectives on, what are some of the inequities that could arise and what are some of the ways in which these technologies could be misused. And so that's the biggest problem that I see in my field.
Anat, you hit on a couple of good points there, and I want to yes and you. First, I want to give you guys a couple of facts. There are 2.1 million people employed in tech in the USA right now, and there's over 307,000 jobs that are available for people to grab in the US. With these numbers, Texas is speeding, and it's created this problem for itself where they need the expert now, and there is not room for an individual coming in as the new person. So we're talking about internships or entry level. Also in tech has this huge issue with women. Women go through hell, they make less. And then I've seen situations in my particular line of work where women ideas were underappreciated. And normally that conversation goes like this. They meet, hey, what are you doing? How are you? You know, tell me a little bit about yourself. Oh, I'm a Java developer. And the person says, Java developer. Okay, explain to me what a Java developer does. You know, and that shows that the woman is definitely underappreciated in that conversation. Secondly, people of color is generalized. I really like that you mentioned on Black people, because organizations like to use people of color because it's a larger number. But when you actually settle in on those smaller numbers, what you find in the tech industry is that Asians, Native Asians, they represent a larger percentage. Indians, not Native Americans, but Indians from India, with that particular descent of people, they represent a larger percentage in the tech industry. But when it comes to Black, we represent a smaller percentage. We're not that big in the tech industry. And so there is this huge need for organizations to look beyond just the typical person that looks like me, oh, let me grab a friend, and really bring in more diversity. And you're hearing more people talk about diversity now, and it's really difficult for them to hire diversity because most of us who are experts in our field, we already have jobs. So where do you get the individuals that you're looking for? Well, you need to start doing things such as apprenticeships or internships, and really bring these people on and treat them as they need to be treated and pay them as they need to be paid. These are just a few of the small issues that I see within my realm, which is the design area that I'm noticing, you know, not from the day-to-day, but I really think that these are some issues that we're having since tech is moving so fast with so many jobs available.
Yeah, I also think there's an element of like not seeing yourself in the workforce, or not thinking you're that type of person. You know, when I was in college, I definitely felt I'm not a technology person, I'm not a science geek. And so I pursued a different career path because it felt like that's where I belonged, because the other side of the community didn't seem available to me. And later in life, I did a post-baccalaureate program in computer science. And I think if more of those kinds of opportunities, when people reach a fork in the road, to take the computer science or to take the technology fork, make it more available to people, make the barrier of entry seem less high. And part of what helps me do that is at NYU Langone, where I work, there are a tremendous number of women in the IT department. And just seeing these other women in leadership positions, in technology positions, not just, you know, HR, IT, or like the business office of IT, but actually in the technology part of the business, I was like, oh, I can do this too. Like, this is a viable career path for me. And making those opportunities and those pathways more obvious and available to people, I think, is really important.
So I'll just throw in, and I'm going to build on Anand's point a little bit, because in the field of educational technology, you know, I think the lack of diversity among founders and inventors in the educational technology space has had a real effect on the kinds of products we're putting in front of our kids. You know, overwhelmingly, educational software that's showing up in K-12 schools in the U.S. is built by folks who are both white and have been good at school, and more importantly, school has been good at them. So these are the people who are trying to figure out what a learning experience should be for, you know, for a young person who might be struggling with school or might be struggling with topics. And so that's a very simple example where you see teams like this designing products for urban schools that they would never use with their own kids, and their fundamental models and constructs about, how our kids work and what our kids need are not anything like the models they would apply to their own. So this is one manifestation of I think what Anand was talking about, which is widespread in many industries.
Yes.
And,
wow. Go ahead if someone wants to add.
Yeah, I just want to follow up briefly on the point that Alicia was making about representation. I come at this. I'm an Indian American. I'm from one of those groups that I think our popular culture very strongly associates with tech, sometimes almost exclusively. And I feel like that I would really love to see our pop culture kind of scramble some of those stereotypes more, right? Because I worry that if our popular culture so strongly associates tech with whites and Asians, it sends an exclusionary message to everybody else. And so I would love to see, a TV show in which, like Ice-T was the computer guy and, Hassan Minhaj was the detective or something like that. Just kind of like scramble those stereotypes more so that people don't get the message from our culture that certain people should go into certain fields.
Yes, that hit the nail on the head right into our kind of next set of topics. And I believe this actually kind of came from you, Anat, in terms of our popular culture and things like that. And so to open it up to you all, just going off of that, some of the things that you all have brought up as far as representation and it being mainly either a white dominated field or just in terms of representation from the Asian community. What are some ways, especially as it relates to our core members here, and as they're working with the youth, that they can do some of those things and kind of build or increase interest from some of our youth from most marginalized groups? So kind of along the lines of what Anat was saying, scrambling up those things. What are you all thinking in that area? And anyone can feel free to start with that one.
Yes, I'll take this on. A couple of things that I always think about is how people get started. One of the major points of interest always come from parents because they always want their children to be in a career where they can make some money. Money is a huge thing. And they always scream that doctor, lawyer route. And we sometimes imitate things that we see, which is why you get the police officer or you get the firefighter. But no one is talking about how fun it is to develop. No one is bringing, well, there are companies that do that, but and predominantly Black organizations or neighborhoods or systems, I don't see where there's tech coming in with programs with children at a young age and say, let's create a game, with tech, with simple things such as you have to type right here for the thing to move right, and you type right here for the thing to move left. If you want this comment to be sent out, you hit with echo with the backslash and then write what the comment you want to be. Teaching students at a young age that technology is fun, that developing is fun, could definitely help them later on in life, because we have this huge fallacy in our head that development is for scientists and mathematicians, and they come in with this extra knowledge and they're able to do these things that people can't do. But no, honestly, it's really quite easy. It's like learning a language. Literally, that's what you're doing. You're learning a different language, whether it's HTML, CSS, C++, or JavaScript. That's the focus should be on, is can you teach your child another language and can you make it fun for them? And that's where we see instances where I was in when I was at an internship where they brought a 12-year-old kid in who had a job as a developer, at an early age. Imagine if I was a developer at the age of 12. God, I couldn't even tell you what I could do with a salary of $30,000 at 12. This is what I think we should start doing, introducing this field to them at an early age and make it fun, so that then as they grow up and get older, they know this is a pathway. We also miss this opportunity with art because people don't make the connection that I'm a graphic designer. I draw for a living. If someone would have told me when I was in high school drawing posters and selling them for 25 cents to my friend that you could do this as a job, it wouldn't have took me to 2015 to do it. I could have done it, more so around 2002 after I graduated from high school. So that's like a huge difference in what things that I am good at that I could have excelled at early versus finding out later, because it just wasn't something that my family talked about, that I didn't see represented in my community. I didn't know anybody that did it until later, until I was curious. These are the things that I'm good at. Let me explore these things and see if there's a job out there for me with the thing that I'm good at. And I came across design and ended up in user experience because that's something that I'm really good at, and I really like the science behind it. So I really think if we can introduce these things to kids, especially kids in these predominantly Black areas, since I'm Black and that's what I identify with, I think we'll see a greater increase and a decrease in that saying where, well, in my CS class, there was only one Black person in that CS class. You'll start to see it increase, because then people won't think computer science, they'll think development, Java language, C++ language, which is completely different.
Yeah, I think to echo some of what Tim is saying, I had to really come to a realization that like art and technology are not in two separate vacuums. There's a really powerful intersection of the two things, and there's a burgeoning career industry at the intersection of those two things, and that's how I got my job. And I had to break this mental model of like, I'm an artistic person, not a technology or a science person. And once I was able to break that, I found that a lot more opportunities became available to me in my own mind. I think they were always sort of available to me, but I was unaware of them to a certain extent. And also, coming from a childhood, I got that similar messaging about lawyer, doctor. My parents loved the post office. They were like, go work for the post office. It's very secure. I never heard jobs like, user experience designer or business analyst, or these were not jobs that we talked about at the kitchen table. And some of that was, I had to educate my own parents about what I do for a living. And I can only imagine that if other parents are made more aware of the opportunities that could be available to their kids in the future, and having that conversation early, broadening the perspective away from just, the kinds of things in a cardboard picture book, that would have helped me open my mental model for what my career could develop into.
Yes, Alicia, and I think that conversation of money, how much we make, that it is something that's livable, needs to happen with parents too. If I come let them know that I make over $100,000 a year, that's a conversation that turns heads. Like, you make what? Doing what? Okay, yeah, this might be something my child could do.
And I want to follow
totally, because when I said, oh, sorry, Greg, super quick, when I said I'm going to get an art history degree, they were like, oh my God, what are you going to do? Like, what job is that? And I was like, I'll figure it out. Like, it sounds like fun to me. And I did figure it out, but the money component and the privilege to have the space to say, I'm going to pursue a career that I don't know has a built-in kind of comfortable salary or safety net is a privilege that I had, and I was able to take advantage of. But I think it's a good point that you raised for sure.
So I was just going to follow up on both of your excellent points. We did a study at Lingo Ventures a few years ago on how people got in, on how individuals got into the tech business, or when did the sort of bulb go off and they caught the bug. And more than half of them had some exposure to programming, but it was when they figured out how to use that technology for another field that they cared about, right? That they got the bug, whether it was to solve a design problem or do something they wanted to do in music, or just games, right? They wanted to make games. So this interaction, between different fields and the opportunity to be creative, it's something it's something that's so important. And fortunately, one thing I'm thrilled about is that there are more and more programming and coding education experiences for young people right now, especially Black kids and urban kids. But sometimes what I'm seeing in some of these programs is that they're over constraining what they focus on. So they'll focus on programming as career opportunity, but won't nurture the creativity, right? And the creativity is really, where the bug clicks.
I'll just echo, I think, what everyone else said. I think the most important thing is the representation and just sort of giving kids an opportunity to see and talk to people who look like them working in tech. I mean, I recognize that I was very privileged growing up to have family members who were in that field. I know not everybody can have that privilege, but I think there are things we can do, as everyone else was saying, to just introduce people in schools through sort of mentorship programs and career days and that kind of thing, to people who are, you know, who look and talk like them, who are being successful in this field.
Excellent, excellent. I think across the board, it even got some conversation going in the chat. A lot of people are echoing what you all are saying and throwing in some resources to try to get the youth more involved. I definitely feel like there's more directions we could go into this, but briefly, I want to shift us to this idea of artificial intelligence. And as it relates to your expertise, how do you all believe that the increasing use of artificial and technology, or even its availability, will help to expand the scope of the work that you all are doing? And Greg, if you could start us off with that question.
Sure. So, you know, I think, you know, there's a lot of experimentation with AI in the ed tech space right now. I don't think we've seen a lot of concrete impact from it yet, or, you know, at least directly in terms of educational technology. But it, you know, it's potentially coming. The, you know, one of the, I think, most interesting threads of work that's going on is basically how to create intelligent teaching assistants, right? So not having AI teach the student, but having an AI do extra work with the student that can be able to interact with the teacher in a productive and supportive way. I think that's promising. At the same time, I think there are things we need to watch out with AI. You know, AIs are trained on training sets. You know, they inherit the assumptions that are in the training sets. We've already had big problems with literacy instruction and other areas based on theoretical models of student learning that are flawed, right? That are overly linear, that don't have to do with how kids learn. And a lot of software is built around that. And I don't want to see that get replicated into AI. But at the same time, I think AI can open up a lot in terms of flexibility and personalization for kids.
I like to say, if you don't intentionally design it for me, you end up intentionally leaving me out of it. There's a couple things that I want to share to help prove my point. So I'm going to share this screen. Hopefully this works. Oh, look like it's working. And these are some of the things that I'm brought in to like work with. You know, here, Google search engine. When you do a search for 3 Black teens, they were getting mugshots of 3 Black teens. But if you did 3 white teens, you was getting these stock photography of 3 white teens. Something else that's happened recently was in England, when you were going to get a passport, my beautiful, voluptuous lips were showing that my mouth was open. This is where people are literally designing people out of software and making it more difficult for them to use. And I think about how useful this would be during the pandemic right now, me being able to apply for a passport in my downtime, and my photo gets up there and it's saying your mouth is open. So you're telling me that all of this means that my mouth is open. Literally what that was is not being inclusive, thinking about the people that you're modeling the program afterwards, and then outlining the different spatial features, and you didn't have representation from that group of people. So what happens is the program is leaving that group of people out. And I'm brought in all the time to help make software more inclusive for these particular group of people. Because I think about my grandma using software, you know, how, you know, if she's going to use it, you know, she has vision problems, she has hearing problems, and there's low light situation. So we're able to create the algorithm so that it could really be helpful to people, but it can also be very hurtful to people. Google is one of the biggest search engines in the world, and it could do a lot to help with representation in certain things, but that search engine is like a child. what you put in it is exactly what you're going to get out of it. So it's going through and it's scraping sites, and it's going to pull all the racist stuff while pulling all the positive stuff. And you want to know what's more out there than positive stuff is the racist and the hate stuff, which is why Google brought in specialists to deal with the search engine to make sure that it's not having so much of that it's able to pull that out or show accurate representation of people. In Google search right now, if you did a Google search for Native American art, 0.03% of that returns is actual Native American art. You know, so how do we create software or continue to include people and show the real thing? How do we make it so that these algorithms are able to identify Native American art from possibly reservations or Native American people, you know, versus representation that someone has drawn of Native American art, but they're not really Native American? That makes it really difficult. You know, it's a hard problem to solve, but luckily there's, you know, jobs and opportunities for people out there. And I believe that as a society, we can definitely do more of this and build more software to help include more people, especially people with disabilities, giving people voices where they weren't able to get voice. Twitter does that really greatly, where it's able to give voice to people who normally wouldn't have voices. There are governors and people who lead countries who are able to get messages out there to their people really quickly, but we can also see how that's able to be abused. So I think that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility, it's an excellent example here, where if you don't watch out who you're designing for, as I said earlier, you intentionally design them out. And I don't know how to stop sharing. There you go. You intentionally design them out of it.
Yeah, I think this idea, if you don't design for me, I'm left out of it, Tim, is so important. I am a lesbian. I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and recently I had my gallbladder out, and I was filling out the form, and the options were single, married, divorced. And I thought to myself, there were no queer people involved in creating this form, because like marriage equality is, and this isn't even a technology thing, this is a paper form, marriage equality is a relatively new phenomenon here. And I would have just had to select single, even though I'm very much not single. And when you design things without that intention in mind, without thinking about the full spectrum of what people's experiences could be, when they fill out a form or when they log into something, when they use your application, when they use your piece of technology, without that intentional inclusion of a wide variety of perspectives, you're going to miss out on things like that. And it's going to inaccurately represent itself in the data. If you were to then pull, from all the forms, all these people said they were single. Well, they may not be. It may just be that we didn't have another way to describe the situation that they're in. So I just think the way you put it so succinctly, if you don't design it for me, I'm left out of it. I think that's a really key message.
So in the legal field, we see a lot of automation that's happening as a result of AI. So I feel like in my kind of day-to-day work, that's sort of the biggest effect that I've seen. But I think sort of overall in the legal industry, what I think the whole industry is going to have to wrestle with, and really the whole legal system, and I think they haven't really, and we're still kind of in the early stages, is basically wrestling with what do you do when you are wronged by AI? If you are discriminated against by a person, in theory, you have redress. It may not always work, but I feel like the court system kind of generally knows how to handle a civil rights lawsuit where a person discriminates against you. I don't know how you get redress if AI discriminates against you. And I know that people are starting to look into these issues at the state and federal level, but I think as AI becomes more ingrained in all kinds of decision making, we're going to have to figure out how to give people an option to challenge things that happen to them if the AI isn't working properly.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. Wow. You all just leave me speechless. I think just adding to these questions, just to be mindful of time, I do want to get to some of our directed questions that come from some of our core members. And so I have one here that I think is really interesting. And it's for Tim, but at the end of what Tim says, I would definitely like to open up to more of our panelists because I think this question is just so needed, and the answer to it, I think, is so that we need to hear it. But for you, Tim, the question comes from one of our core members, Sean Dunsu, and so he wants to know, kind of, being that you're from St. Louis, like you said, and it has a reputation of being one of the most racially segregated cities in America. Have you had the opportunity to work with maybe any of your local activists? And if so, what kind of were your takeaways? And what does that look like being in this industry and trying to do that social justice activism?
Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. I am owner of Design Plus Diversity. It's a conference that happens once a year where we bring designers together to talk about the diversity in the design industry. But this it expanded out into tech too. And we had lots of activists to come and talk about the issue. So when we had the riots in Ferguson happening around that time, you saw that representation in my conference. You know, we saw D. Nichols come, who was greatly affected about the things that happened in Ferguson. What a lot of people don't know is I lived right there in that same apartment complex. I heard the gunshots. And it's one of those things where it's kind of unreal about things that happen, but then after you try to piece your life back together and ask yourself what to do. So I was greatly affected by it. And one of the things that came out of that was Design Plus Diversity, where I do spend time, you know, to talk about these different diversity issues that I'm interested in, that I can focus on, such as ageism. You know, that's something that we don't talk about a lot in the design industry or in tech, you know, but as people get older and having them being aged out is an issue, you know, so older people are having a problem finding jobs because they have the education, they have the years of experience, but what it's going to cost to pay them to do the job is the issue, you know, so do they get less pay, or, you know, how do you continuously create a system that they continue to fit in, you know, especially with more new people coming into it all the time. Dealing with that, that's my outlet. Creating personal projects that represent the things that I'm thinking of and doing is my outlet, such as the 28 Days of Black Designers. That's a personal project of mine that I created that spotlight Black designers and art issues in the design industry. They say, where are all the Black designers? I don't see them, you know. Well, we're everywhere. We're in lots of other places. We only make up 3% of the industry, and Black males, we make up 1.86% of the design industry. You know, so we're here. We're just in small numbers, and those of us who are considered experts within the field, we're, you know, even in smaller minority there and in different places. So those are just my creative outlets, especially with all of the social action that's happening here in St. Louis. I create projects. I created several of them to help, number one, other people express themselves about those things. And as being a person in tech, I'm able to use technology and what I've learned from like on the job and that experience to put into something that's more meaningful. And that makes me happy to go to work because one of the things that I look for in working for organizations is an organization that will protect me, but also stand behind me in the things that I do and be happy that I'm doing those things. And my job really encouraged me to do more, really push out and do more spotlight on the Black community with other Black designers and really talk about the issues. And I'm happy to be a part of an organization that's able to speak out against hate and allow me to come in and be that voice on speaking out against hate or in these other inequities or injustices for them. Those are my outlets and how I deal with it. It can be pretty a lot in your day-to-day with having your job, a conference, plus personal projects that you're working on. But that added with the extra press that we people of color feel from the news and how we represent it and the things that are happening to us, because it is emotionally draining. You find small things, and those are small things that I'm committed to that I can do day to day that helps me. I hope I answered your question, because sometimes I just ramble and I know it.
I definitely think you did. I hope, Sean, out there, I hope that was the answer you were looking for. And like I said, again, if anyone wants to add before we jump into our next question, definitely go for it. I think this is kind of the age and the age group that we're looking to hear. How do we be social in this kind of technological world? And so the next question that I have goes to Anat, and it's a question about the practical technologies that you have come across in your line of work. And as a result of COVID-19 and students, how does that kind of affect them? So really, how does COVID-19 kind of affect this work that you're doing, and especially as it relates to students' access to technology?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately can't speak too much to the question of student access to technology, other than sort of what I see as a parent. I mean, I think, we've everything's gone online. Students kind of have to do everything electronically, and I think that, from what I've seen, at least where I live, school districts have done a decent job of giving people the technology they need, but that's not enough, because if in your household you don't have anybody who can help a child actually use the technology effectively, just giving a student a laptop or an iPad or whatever doesn't really solve the problem. But I mean, in my day-to-day work, I mean, to be honest, and again, I recognize I'm very privileged. Like for my job, it hasn't really affected me that much at all, and I realize that that in itself is kind of contributing to inequality even more, because the people who are in jobs that have been buffered from this tend to be people who are already advantaged in the first place. So that effect on employment is just causing things to get even worse, I think.
Thank you. And I think even hearing your perspective as a parent is one that is well needed, because now that we're in this virtual space, we kind of come across as core members and as team leaders and impact managers and things like that, seeing how students and parents are interacting, and families and guardians. So definitely thank you for that. This next question goes to Greg, and it's, do you feel that the venture capital and tech industries ever come at odds with the goal of building more inclusive educational settings? And if so, what are kind of some of the things that you can do to balance that?
So that's a great question. I think, it's definitely the case that I think, actually, I was going to say something, but I'm going to rethink it. And because I've been very interested by the emergence of pods, right? The pods, the educational pods that everybody talks about, which is the opportunity to build sort of a mini school, a mini school of, other kids and other families. And a lot of people are talking about that, have been talking about that as a way to, create higher quality educational bubbles in the context of COVID. So, it's been fascinating to watch the rush of entrepreneurs and money into the pod space. It's been interesting to see how few of those pods care about inclusiveness. They really tend to value the things that people tend to value when they're picking their schools, right? They want to be around kids like theirs, or kids like the ones that they want their kids to be like. So, I think that's one place where we see technology and VC working together to create probably a less inclusive space. That said, there are a couple of VC-funded businesses that are trying to create inclusive spaces, and we'll be able to use that fuel to do it. So, the story cuts both ways. I think, in VC and tech responds to what they think the people want. And so it's really the perception of the customer and the voice of the customer. And right now, I think tech's successes and failures in inclusion are driven by really social failures about inclusion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Greg. Looking at time, I know we have to wrap up soon. And so I want to close the session with another directed question for Alicia. And the question is really, how can someone who's looking to kind of get into this field, what are some things that they could do? What would be your advice for someone who wants to really kind of either whether they're first learning about this or they want to kind of hit the ground running and get into this industry?
Sure. So if you're sort of already out of college, which was my personal experience, I was looking for kind of more of a short-term educational supplement, and there's a lot of programs that are available. I can put some of them in the chat for you to explore. I personally am doing the post-baccalaureate program at NYU. It's very affordable, it's short, and it's a great kickstart to see if you are even really interested. I needed like a primer to see if it's really what I wanted for my long-term career. I would also say I did a lot of informational interviews and getting to know people at my work and really understanding, like, what do you do every day when you sit down at your computer? Like, I see you over there, you know, furiously working, excited, but I don't know like what you actually do. So building a community of people that work in the industry and understanding at a day-to-day level what that work looks like. I think in my head I had this idea that like technology people sat in a dark basement and like were covered in Cheeto dust and like just weren't really living the kind of life I wanted to live. And I obviously work in the industry now and realize you can do a lot more than what the stereotype in my head was. So if you're already out of college, I would explore some of these shorter term Kickstart type programs. I would just reach out to people. I'm happy to talk to anyone on here after the fact. I'm sure everybody else is as well. To learn about, you know, what we're working on. I can connect you with other people, and just reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Like, I think LinkedIn is a great resource. Kind of corny, but most people love to talk about what they do for work. So if there's something that interests you, like, learn as much as you can about it, and don't assume you're not qualified. I mean, obviously, if the job is like pure programming and you've never programmed, probably not. But I used to like assume if it said, you know, 3 years experience and I had 2.5 years, like, oh, that's not for me. And go for it, basically. Don't assume you're not qualified. So those are some tips that I would have.
I want to add on to that too. I mentor kids a lot, especially designers fresh out of college. 3 areas that I normally work on is the mind, skills, and work. Mind, getting your mind right, ready in like these environments. 2 books I always suggest to people for those is The Ideal Team Player and The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. 2 really good reads, but they help you look at problems differently and common things that you are taught as a child being brought up. When it comes to skills, there's lots of different places where you can learn skills, learning how to use the actual programs, you know, the Adobe Suite programs. You can go to YouTube, you can go to Skillshare. There's lots of opportunities for you to learn how to do that. And then lastly is actually work, being able to show that you have the skills that you said that you have, you know. So, and I tell people to do personal projects, do your own thing, and then look at what you've done and compare it in contrast with other people. And ask yourself, how can I get my work to look like that? And if you continue to push that narrative, you'll start to see that increase in skills, in level, and design too, if you're wanting to lead a design track.
Yes, thank you. I will pass it over to Bismod, but before I do, I just want to say thank you all to our panelists. You were fantastic. Just hearing what you all had to say on the variety of topics, I know, like, our core, I could see it from the chat. They're all engaged, even staff members. So this is really a great discussion, and I'm so glad. Thank you for all of you who are participated in the chat, because it is really blowing up. And so it's just great to see the conversation. I'm so glad I got to be your moderator for this. This was a blast for me. I will stop talking now and pass it back over to Bismod to close us off. But thank you all.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I know I learned a lot and was taking a lot of notes. I'm pretty sure everyone else was as well. We'll probably get a lot of questions. So thank you for taking out the time. It was invaluable for me, and I know for everyone else as well. I'm going to hit the stop broadcast button. Again, no clue what it does, but we'll find out. So thank you.